This program contains discussions and descriptions of sensitive subject matter that some viewers may find disturbing or upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to What Catholics Believe. I'm your host, Jim Erling, and the topic of today's show is Sedevacantism.
These individuals are known as Sedevacantists. They believe the last true pope was Pope Pius XII in 1958. The group is formally known as the Congregation of Mary Immaculate, or CMRI. Its history includes SWAT team raids, allegations of pedophilia, institutionalized racism, and Freemason conspiracy theories. The current leader of the CMRI is Mark Pivarunis, whose official title is Superior General. But before we look into the shady history of Pivarunis, we need to first understand how the CMRI began. And where better to start than with the founder, Francis Schuckardt. Schuckardt was born in Seattle, Washington on July 10, 1937, to German immigrant parents, Frank and Gertrude Schuckardt. He graduated high school in 1954 and later attended Seattle University, earning a degree in education and linguistics. In 1958, Schuckardt joined the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima, a group devoted to traditional Catholic values and reverence to the Virgin Mary. He enrolled in seminary in 1959, but dropped out in his first year due to health issues, which is a reoccurring pattern throughout his life. Over 2 years, he was reportedly struck with typhoid, leading to an 8-day coma in 1961, thrombophlebitis, otherwise known as blood clots, in 1963. Schuckardt attributed both recoveries to miracles from the Virgin Mary and leveraged these stories to rise to the rank of international secretary within the Blue Army. Schuckardt would capitalize on these, quote, miracles and would become the poster boy for the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima. Combining his linguistic background with the era's fear of communism, Schuckardt relentlessly toured North America from 1963 to 1967. He's documented giving lectures in up to 20 American cities, including San Diego, Portland, and Chicago. He had a knack for the dramatic and exploited local newspapers, limited fact-checking, boasting of international travels with locations that changed between interviews. On February 11, 1967, the Vatican held a press conference concerning the third secret of Fatima, a supposed prophecy from a Portuguese nun, Lucia Santos. The Vatican announced the letter would remain a secret and not be released to the public. Santos had previously revealed the first two secrets in 1941. The first secret of Fatima is a described vision of hell. The second secret of Fatima is a claim that World War I would end and another war would occur during the reign of Pope Pius XI, and that Russia would need to be consecrated to Catholicism to prevent World War II. The second secret's predictions are extremely debated and, for the most part, widely debunked. World War II did not begin in Europe until September 1st, 1939, by which time Pope Pius XI had already been succeeded. Essentially, World War II did not start in the time frame supposedly given by the Virgin Mary, as Pius XI was succeeded long before World War II started. Despite the shakiness of Santos's claims, the decision to withhold the third secret was enough confirmation for Schuckardt that the Vatican had been compromised by outside forces and was no longer truly Catholic. In August of 1967, Schuckardt began assembling like-minded Catholics in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, interested in practicing what he considered the true Catholic faith. Under the approval of Bishop Sylvester Trennan, he founded the Congregation of Mary Immaculate, Queen of the Universe. At this time, Schuckardt had no active priests in the congregation and forbade the practice of the new Mass. Schuckardt gave his last lecture on behalf of the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima on February 24th, 1968. His subject matter shifted dramatically, now centered on the illegitimacy of the Vatican, anti-papal power, threats from Freemasons and Protestants, and warnings of world destruction. Due to Schuckart's shift in tone in his Blue Army speeches, he was warned by his superiors to obey the teaching of Vatican II or stop using the name of the Blue Army. And just like that, Schuckardt left the Blue Army. With the assistance of Dennis Chicoine, the two continued to lecture under the new name Fatima Cell Movement. Around this time, the CMRI purchased a large plot of land in Rothram, Idaho, and opened a school. Former members described the institution as run by nuns and brothers who had barely graduated themselves. Key conditions reported were there was no co-education, boys and girls were separated, speaking was forbidden, even in sign language, and high school students had no proper classes and were forced to retake grade school years multiple times. In 1970, Schuckardt received a letter from Daniel Quilter Brown, a bishop from the Catholic separatist group American Old Catholic Church. Bishop Brown eventually ordained Schuckardt as both a priest and a bishop during the same ceremony in Chicago in late 1971. The ceremony took place in a motel room, as they were not permitted in any Catholic churches. By 1973, Bishop Brown's relationship with the CMRI had soured. Brown claimed in a letter published by the Seattle Times that the group had become a personal cult of Francis Schuckardt and could not call itself Catholic. In 1974, Bishop Trennan, the bishop who had originally approved the CMRI, publicly denounced the group in an article published by the Times News in Twin Falls, Idaho. In 1974, the first of many litigations arrived when Schuckardt was sued by the husbands of two of his nuns who had fled to Schuckart's convent in Idaho without informing their families. Brothers Joseph and Henry Radecki each filed for $46,000 in damages, alleging that Schuckardt had convinced their wives and children to leave without warning. When Joseph flew to Idaho, his wife successfully hid the children from him. Although the brothers initially won the settlement, the court overturned the decision in a 1976 Ohio hearing. The court ruled it was not concerned with the claims of child alienation. Only the wives' alienation of affection was considered. So despite all the clear evidence that the children were alienated, supposedly the evidence wasn't strong enough with the wives' alienation for the court case to be considered. The ruling came down to a narrow legal technicality. The court stated it was not concerned in this case with a claim by a parent against a third party who maliciously alienates the affections of a minor child, meaning the child alienation angle was simply set aside. The only legally recognizable claim was the wives' alienation of affection towards their husbands. And on that question, the court held that without proof of deliberate intent to destroy the marriages, a religious sect has lawful right to solicit members. The irony behind this is the children the court couldn't protect from the CMRI compound in the 1970s grew up to become fathers. Francisco and Dominic Radecki, the twin brothers who wrote Tumultuous Times and became two of the CMRI's most prolific apologists under Pivarunis. They are effectively the living outcome of the legal failure. There was also a parallel case, O'Neill versus Schuckardt, where Jerry O'Neill sued as guardian for his 5 children. That jury returned a unanimous verdict of $250,000, finding the defendants had alienated his wife's affections, invaded marital privacy, and invaded the children's privacy. That one was also contested on appeal. However, the appeal was unsuccessful. So the pattern is consistent here. We have documented evidence of families being split, fathers winning at the jury level, and the courts narrowing the legal standard in a way that let the organization off the hook. In 1976, the legal troubles for the CMRI continued as John M. Tamplin filed a $14 million lawsuit. His claim centered on the church causing his separation from his wife and catastrophic financial and property losses. The $14 million figure represented the full extent of what he claimed to have lost, personal, financial, and marital damages combined. This lawsuit was unsuccessful, however. No court records have surfaced showing any award or settlement in his favor. So rather than accepting the legal defeat, Tamplin pivoted to public protest. He and his daughter, Margie Schuckardt, parked a truck outside Mount St. Michael's, bearing signs reading, "The Crusade is a satanic family-splitting cult, and Francis Schuckardt is not a bishop." In 1978 and 1979, he was arrested by the Spokane County Police for refusing to sign a parking ticket during one of these protests. He then filed a $200,000 damages claim over the arrest. The CMRI moved for dismissal, but the motion was rejected, though the ultimate outcome of the claim is not documented in any available records. The CMRI also obtained a restraining order preventing Tamplin from bringing his protest vehicle onto church property. So the irony behind this case is that Margie Schuckardt later became one of the most significant witnesses against the CMRI. She testified in the O'Neill case about cult-like activities and mind control techniques, which was arguably far more damaging to the CMRI than any of her father's lawsuits. Now, with this litigation section of the video, we've been jumping around a little bit in the timeline. I real quick want to jump back to 1978. So in 1978, the CMRI purchased Mount St. Michael's Seminary, then valued at $1.5 million, including a $255,000 initial cash payment for the massive 715-acre facility. This purchase was reportedly made through an entity known as Pillar Investment Company, an apparent attempt to deceive the Jesuits who were selling the property and would never knowingly sell to a fringe splinter group like the CMRI. Spokane Chronicle reported in May 1978 that in addition to these assets, the church also possessed 9 houses in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, used for various different purposes. Newspapers speculated Schuckardt's own mansion on the 140-acre City of Mary had a reported worth of $500,000. Now, it was around this time in 1978 and 1979 that the CMRI went through a name change and changed their name to the Tridentine Latin Rite Catholic Church, the TLRCC. For the sake of this video, and you'll see in a little bit why, I'm still going to refer to the group right now as the CMRI. It's just for ease of understanding. So at this point, the CMRI just changed their name, and the reason they did this was likely to distance themselves from all the previous litigation and allegations that are starting to come out against them. And in the early 1980s, news broke of anti-Semitic and anti-American teachings being forced through the church as required reading. Former members quoted Schuckardt as claiming, "America is under a Freemason republic. It was anti-Catholic to support the American flag, and there was an active Zionist conspiracy to take over the world." And it was around this time as well that the O'Neill case went through in the early 1980s, and I would say this was one of the catalysts towards Schuckart's inevitable downfall. In April of 1984, 4 seminarians went on camera with Seattle's ABC affiliate KOMO TV to confirm that Schuckardt had sexually abused them while they were studying for their priesthood. In 1984, Dennis Schuckardt finally made his move. Schuckardt had been with Schuckardt since the very beginning, a former Marine from New England. He heard Schuckardt speak in 1965 and became his most devoted follower. Schuckardt ordained him as a priest in 1975 and made him Vicar General, number 2 in the entire organization. For nearly 20 years, Schuckardt was Schuckardt's most loyal lieutenant. But by the early 1980s, things had fallen apart. Schuckardt needed Demerol injections every 2 hours just to function. Public masses were being canceled without explanation. Young men who had given years of their lives waiting to be ordained as priests were being told to keep waiting indefinitely. Cash and uncashed checks were piling up in corners of the priory, unmanaged and forgotten. Schuckardt had seen enough, and on May 27, 1984, he made his move. He had secretly canceled every public Sunday Mass except one. When the congregation gathered for that final Mass, Schuckardt stepped up to the pulpit and publicly accused Schuckardt of everything: drug addiction, sexual abuse of Sumerians, theft of church funds, and that Schuckardt would privately claim that he himself was the true pope. The response was almost immediate. Within hours, Schuckardt had the backing of most of the priests, brothers, sisters, and lay members. On the night of May 26th, Schuckardt was in charge. By May 28th, he was finished. Schuckart's inner circle had seen it coming, however. They were already loading moving vans with cash, drugs, and religious texts before Schuckardt even stepped up to the pulpit. When the confrontation reached the mansion, a shot was reportedly fired. Schuckardt's men crashed through the compound's security gate to escape. Schuckardt disappeared. He failed to appear at the legal hearing that followed. He surfaced in a motel room, the source of the famous photograph that I've shown in this video a few times, that eventually ended up in the press. On June 3rd of 1984, he left Spokane permanently. He took with him 1 priest, 11 brothers, and 4 nuns, fewer than 100 people out of thousands. Schuckardt pretty much kept everything: the buildings, the schools, the property, the name. Schuckardt would in turn excommunicate Schuckardt for the revolt. The excommunication was unfortunately never lifted. Here's where it gets important to understand something. The abuse that would eventually bring Schuckardt down wasn't a secret, not to the people around him. It had been known internally for nearly a decade. A priest named Father Clement Kubesh, the only man in the organization at that time with legitimate pre-Vatican II seminary training, made accusations against Schuckardt in the early 1970s. He was ignored, and he ended up leaving the group specifically because he had found out about the sexual abuse and nothing was being done. Basically, a young religious brother who lived at Schuckardt's priory was assigned to administer Schuckardt's Demerol injections. What happened behind closed doors deeply troubled him. He went to his spiritual director for guidance. His spiritual director told him the matter had already been looked into, and they told him to stay silent. And now this is where the current leader, Mark Pivarunis, comes in. Pivarunis is the man who leads the CMRI today. He is the bishop, the superior general, the face of the organization, right? He lived at the priory during this period, and in a 1997 book published by Oxford University Press, he confirmed on the record exactly what he knew. He said, and I'm quoting this directly, "He didn't touch me, but he was definitely sexually abusing seminarians, usually at his private residence in Spokane, and he was also taking a lot of drugs. His immorality was scandalous, but I continued to regard him as my legitimate bishop." Let that sink in. The man who leads the CMRI today knew his bishop was sexually abusing seminarians. He didn't leave, he didn't report it, he stayed and built his entire career and the organization's current structure on that foundation. Pivarunis didn't stumble across this information as an outsider. He entered the organization as a 15-year-old boy in 1974 and lived inside the community for a decade as a professed religious brother. By his own admission, he knew Schuckardt was abusing seminarians at his private residence. That's not someone who failed to notice something. That's someone who knew, stayed silent, and then rose to lead the organization after the man he protected was finally removed. Now, shortly after Schuckardt had left the organization, more allegations against the CMRI started to come out. And unfortunately, the abuse was not limited to Schuckardt himself. In 1986, a former student named Julie McKinsey described what life was like in the schools. At age 12, she was forced to eat rotten carrots to avoid food waste. When she vomited, she was beaten, given a black eye and a swollen face, and then told to eat her own vomit with a spoon. The nuns gave her a choice: say "Jesus, I love you" and lick it clean, or say "Jesus, I hate you" and refuse. She refused, and she was punched repeatedly in the face. Other documented practices at the schools included regular beatings with wooden paddles and leather straps, students being forced to walk on bare knees across unpaved parking lots for hours, causing bleeding and permanent joint damage. Girls having their heads shaved as punishment. In one case, a girl's head was shaved simply for explaining to a classmate what the menstrual cycle was. There was even a case where Schuckardt shaved a girl's head himself. Now, after being expelled from Spokane, Schuckardt eventually settled in California and opened a new school in Greenville. Almost immediately, obviously, the same pattern surfaced. Things like physical abuse and Holocaust denial being taught as a fact. In 1987, a SWAT team raided his compound at Lake Almanor, California. What they found was extraordinary. Stockpiles of drugs, Demerol, morphine, Percodan, and a quarter pound of marijuana labeled T, 15 to 17 foreign bank accounts, a weapons cache of handguns and rifles, stolen property, books on killer darts, cyanide grenades, nasal spray explosives, and ritualistic limb removal. 8 copies of a documented Nazi publication, order forms for pamphlets with titles like Death to Race Mixers and Inflation is Jewish. The group sued Plumas County for $185 million over the raid. That's more than 8 times the county's entire annual budget. All charges were eventually dropped in 1989 when Schuckardt agreed to enter drug counseling. Meanwhile, the CMRI, now under Dennis Chicoine's leadership, had its own serious problem. A priest named Father Mario Blanco had been operating a CMRI-associated chapel in Tacoma, Washington, with approximately 170 parishioners. Blanco had been credibly accused of serial sexual abuse going back years. In 1991, a formal settlement was reached. The parishioners tried to remove him, and they formally asked the CMRI to send a replacement priest. That request confirmed the institutional relationship between Blanco's chapel and the CMRI. The parish eventually broke away from Blanco, bought their own property, and renamed themselves St. Mary's Parish. But the damage had been done. Blanco's conduct had so thoroughly alienated other traditionalist bishops in the United States that the CMRI found itself completely cut off, with no bishop willing to work with them and no way to ordain a new priest. This forced the new leader, Father Mark Pivarunis, to act fast. He traveled to Mexico and arranged to be consecrated as a bishop by an elderly Sedevacantist bishop named Moses Carmona, based in Acapulco. On September 24th, 1991, Carmona consecrated Pivarunis as a bishop at Mount St. Michael's. The emergency arrangement that Pivarunis had scrambled to put together in Mexico became the permanent foundation of the CMRI's entire episcopal structure. Every priest the CMRI has ordained since that day traces his authority back to that rushed consecration, a consecration that only happened because of Blanco's crimes. Francis Schuckardt spent his final years as a recluse, moving between locations in California and Washington State. He died on November 5th, 2006, in Redmond, Washington. He was 69 years old. Dennis Chicoine, the man who overthrew him, had died 11 years earlier, in August of 1995. From cancer at Mount St. Michael's. He had returned there to spend his final days. The legal battle between the two factions continued for nearly a decade after the split. It was settled out of court in 1993. Chicoine's side won the majority of everything. The CMRI today presents itself as a reformed organization, one that put its troubled past behind it when Schuckardt was removed in 1984. But I would argue that Schuckardt has simply been made into a convenient scapegoat, and that the systematic problems never went away. The man who leads the organization today, Pivarunis, personally knew about the sexual abuse and stayed silent. His entire authority as a bishop traces back to a crisis caused by another priest's criminal conduct. The CMRI has no public list of credibly accused clergy, no abuse reporting policy, no independent oversight because they reject the authority of the current pope and bishops. No external Catholic body can compel them to adopt the transparency measures the mainstream church implemented after 2002. In 2022, a woman who had been raised in the CMRI from 1967 and left around 2007 stated that she was personally aware of 2 priests or brothers who had sexually abused girls within the organization. She said the victims did not want to go to the police. She said one of those individuals was still working with the CMRI at the time that she made the statement. Today, the CMRI operates across 14 countries. They run over 120 churches and mass centers. They staff 20 schools. They train new priests at the seminary in Nebraska. And most of the people sitting in those pews have no idea about any of this. Some people will watch everything we've just covered and say, that was then. Schuckardt is gone. The CMRI has moved on. So let's ask the question directly. Is the CMRI still a cult today? At the top of the CMRI sits one man, Bishop Mark Pivarunis, Superior General. He's simultaneously the head of the religious congregation, the only bishop with authority over its priests, and the final word on all theological and institutional decisions. There is no board above him, no external bishop he answers to, no Rome, no oversight body of any kind. That is not a coincidence. It is the direct result of the theology. Because the CMRI rejects every pope since 1958 as illegitimate, there is no higher authority they recognize, which means Pivarunis answers to no one on earth. Researchers who study high control groups identify this as one of the clearest warning signs. The Cult Information Center defines a cult as a group whose founder or leader is dogmatic, not accountable, and has charisma. Pivarunis fits every part of that definition. And on top of this, here's another critical point. Pivarunis entered the CMRI at age 15. He has never lived outside of it. He was formed entirely within its walls. He has no frame of reference beyond the institution he now leads. The man at the top of the organization was shaped from adolescence by the very system he now controls. And there is no mechanism anywhere in that system to remove him, correct him, or hold him accountable. When Schuckardt went wrong, it took a decade of dysfunction and revolt by his own clergy to stop him. And guess what? With Pivarunis, there is no shitcoin waiting in the wings to overthrow him. Abuse is still happening, and the abuser is still there. In 2022, Francis Schuckardt, a woman who spent 40 years inside the CMRI and left around 2007, made a statement about what she personally knew. She said she was aware of 2 priests or brothers within the organization who had sexually abused girls. She said that victims did not want to go to the police. And she said one of those individuals was still working with the CMRI at the time she was speaking. The statement was made in 2022, not 1984, not the Schuckardt era, 2022. And the response from the CMRI? Nothing. No investigation, no public statement, no removal, no acknowledgement that the allegation was even made. This is not the behavior of a reformed organization. This is the same pattern that defined the Schuckardt years, an accusation made in an institution that looks the other way. Leaving costs you your family. One of the most consistent markers of a high control group is what happens when someone tries to leave. Bernie Radecki, the son of one of the men who sued Schuckardt in 1974, left the CMRI with his wife Francie around 2007. His sister Mary, who had remained inside the organization, changed their mother's will while she was deep in dementia, cutting Bernie out. When he didn't fight it, Mary sent him $1,000. Francie described it as a slap in the face. The family stopped speaking to them entirely after they left. George Wagner and Jacinta, also former members who returned to the mainstream church, suffered the same fate. Francie described them as being cast off. In 2007, 15 nuns left Mount St. Michael's after Pivarunis issued a decree requiring all sisters to sign a statement agreeing with CMRI theology or leave. 15 women, many of them whom had given decades of their lives to the organization, were effectively expelled for insufficient loyalty and cut off from the community they had known their entire adult lives. Researchers describe shunning as one of the most powerful control mechanisms a high control group uses, not just to punish those who leave, but to terrify those who are thinking about it. If leaving means losing your family, your community, and everything you have ever known, most people will not leave. That is the point. Pivarunis breaks the rules he claims to uphold. The CMRI's entire identity rests on one claim, that they alone hold the true Catholic faith, specifically the teaching of the Church before 1958, without compromise or deviation. But even within the traditional Catholic world, that claim does not hold up. Pivarunis publicly defends a position called baptism of desire, the idea that someone can be saved without actual water baptism if they sincerely desire it. Other traditionalist Catholics argue this contradicts defined pre-1958 Catholic dogma on the absolute necessity of baptism. He also publicly endorses natural family planning, a form of regulated birth avoidance. Critics within the traditional Catholic world argue the pre-1958 Church's teaching on this was far more restrictive than Pivarunis acknowledges, and that his position represents a modern accommodation dressed up as tradition. The significance of this is not the theology itself, the significance is what it reveals about the structure. When there is one unaccountable leader at the top, a leader who answers to no one, the rules become whatever he says they are. The pre-1958 Church he claims to represent had popes, councils, canon lawyers, and a global hierarchy to interpret and apply doctrine consistently. The CMRI has Pivarunis, and when Pivarunis decides that something is acceptable, whether that's a particular theological position or an accused priest who keeps his job, there is no mechanism to say otherwise. The information environment within the CMRI is self-contained. Members of the CMRI live in a world almost entirely constructed by the institution itself. Their children attend CMRI schools where the curriculum, the teachers, and the daily environment are controlled by the organization. The priests brothers, and sisters who run those schools were themselves educated in CMRI institutions. Many have never lived outside the system. Their theological reading is CMRI publications, books like Tumultuous Times by the Radecki twins, who were themselves born into the organization and formed entirely within it. Their community is the CMRI parish, where the social connections, the friendships, the marriages, and the entire fabric of daily life are bound up within the group. This is what researchers call a totalistic information environment. It is not necessarily enforced by guards or locked doors. It is enforced by the simple reality that every relationship, every source of knowledge, and every social consequence in a person's life runs through the institution. Questioning the institution means questioning everything at once. High control group researchers note that this kind of environment makes genuine informed consent impossible because members are never given the full picture. They don't know what happened with Schuckardt in detail. They don't know about the Blanco chain. They don't know what Pivarunis said on record in 1997. They don't know about the 2022 abuse allegations. They know what the CMRI tells them, and the CMRI tells them they are the one true church, and everyone outside of it is lost. The final argument isn't just that the CMRI hides its past from its members, it's that the man at the top is caught doing it on record in a recorded interview, and we can show you exactly where. In a sit-down interview with the Catholic Family Podcast, Bishop Mark Pivarunis discussed at length his life, his vocation, and the history of the organization he leads. In over an hour of conversation, he manages to never once mention the man who founded the organization, Francis Schuckardt, the man who built the CMRI from nothing, who ran it for nearly 2 decades, whose abuse triggered a revolt, a SWAT team raid, a criminal investigation, and a complete institutional collapse. Gone, erased, never mentioned. But Schuckardt isn't the only one missing. The 1987 SWAT raid on Schuckart's compound at Lake Almanor, the drugs, the weapons, cash, the Nazi literature, the foreign bank accounts goes completely unmentioned. Pivarunis moves from the early lecture circuit years straight to the Omaha expansion as if the intervening decade simply did not happen. When he does address the Blanco situation, which was the serial sexual abuse that directly caused his consecration as a bishop, here's how he describes it.
And then we had a very interesting situation. Now I'm not going to go into any of the particular details, but one of the heaviest crosses for me in my priesthood was a challenge that we encountered. And there was a mass center, a church, and there was an unfortunate falling out between the lay people and the priest. There were issues with the priest. I thought there were serious issues with the priest. And this priest successfully was able to, I believe through misinformation, alienate the bishops of the United States from CMRI.
Issues with the priest. That is how the current leader of the CMRI describes the serial sexual abuse carried out by Father Mario Blanco against his own parishioners, a CMRI-affiliated priest operating a chapel of 170 people. Not abuse, not predation, not a formal legal settlement, issues. He goes further. He tells his interviewer that the full extent of the problem only became clear after Blanco died. His exact words.
There was about 170 people at this church. All they wanted is the Mass and the sacraments. They had issues with the priest, and it wasn't until the priest died that we realized that the priest had some very serious issues when he left the Novus Ordo.
A formal legal settlement was reached in 1991, while Blanco was still alive. The parishioners formally requested a replacement priest from the CMRI, confirming the organization knew of the situation while it was happening. Pivarunis was the superior general at the time. He was not kept in the dark. What he is doing in this interview is subtly reordering the timeline, making it appear as though the Carmona consecration happened after the Blanco situation was resolved, rather than because of it. He describes the consecration as providential, guided by God. A letter arrived from Bishop Carmona, they prayed, then they voted. What he omits is that no other bishop in America would work with the CMRI at that moment because of Blanco's documented crimes. The consecration wasn't providential. It was a last resort, and the word abuse is never spoken once in the entire interview. This is how institutional memory gets managed, not through outright denial, but through careful language, through words like issues, and serious concerns, and unfortunate falling out, through omitting names, through reordering timelines, through an hour of history that somehow leaves out the founder, the raid, the drugs, the weapons, the abuse settlements, and the actual reason the organization's entire episcopal authority exists. They are not unaware by accident. They are unaware because the man at the top, the man giving recorded interviews about the organization's history, has decided deliberately and on camera what they are allowed to know. What you don't know can't make you leave. And that, more than anything else, is how high control groups stay alive. This is a story about what happens when religious authority goes completely unchecked. When there's no outside oversight, no accountability, no one to answer to. When the institution matters more than the people inside of it. The CMRI calls itself the one true Catholic Church. But from its founding in a motel room in Chicago, to the SWAT team raids, the lawsuits, the covered up abuse, and the current leader's own admission that he knew and said nothing, the record tells a very different story.